And this should be a pretty exciting match to see basically how Kevin's take on Grixis Delver matches up against Affinity. Affinity is kind of one of the speed tests of the format. Whenever you're bringing a new deck to the field, you're always going to try to play against Affinity, play against Infect, play against Burn. These are the decks that basically, it's like when you're trying to ride the roller coaster, you need to be like this high to ride the ride.
Yeah.
You got to be this fast to play the format, basically.
Well, Andrew is going to be on 6. He's going to lead off with an Ink Moth Nexus and a Memnite and pass the turn over to Kevin. Interestingly enough, Kevin's deck is one of the few decks in the format that still plays Electrolyze, which is a card that is absolutely insane against Affinity.
Yeah, Andrew's possible of some really fast starts that can just blow Kevin out of the water, but as soon as we get into the mid-game, Kevin not only has Electrolyze, which is great, but he's also has access to Kolaghan's command. That combined with Snapcaster Mage will give Kevin an extremely robust late game, and Kevin will be able to answer everything that Andrew puts onto the board.
Well, Kevin is just going to lead off on a Steam Vents and take a couple points of damage. Andrew has a Glimmer Void and will attack for 1, knocking Kevin down to 17 total.
And from this start, I would assume that Kevin is going to run away with this game and it's going to look extremely lopsided. But Andrew's, well, I should say because Andrew's not really getting the start that he wants. He's got a little bit of a slow start. This Affinity deck is capable of essentially dumping its entire hand onto the board in the first 2 turns of the game, but so far Andrew has only presented a 1/1 threat.
Kevin does have a Thought Scour on Andrew's end step. And for his turn, he's going to use a Polluted Delta, fall down to 16, go get a basic Swamp, and if he has a Tasker the Golden Fang, he can just actually play a 2-mana 4/5 right now. Tarmogoyf's a good card. Even better when you don't have to play green to get it.
Yeah, Tassiger is a very, very sweet card. I'm curious to see how often Kevin actually has the opportunity to activate Tassiger. That's one of the reasons that people moved to Gurmag Angler in the Legacy version of this deck, was because it's just so uncommon that you ever get the activated ability of it. And in the Tassiger mirrors and up against Tarmogoyfs, having a 5/5 is significantly better than having a 4/5.
Kevin is going to go ahead and cast a Serum Visions. He'll draw a card and scry 2.
And despite
he could still play Tassiger here, even if he has it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, this is one of the reasons why we see these Delve cards go so well with the cheap cantrips, is because you can use the cantrips and they don't end up using your mana when you're thinking of the purposes of casting a creature with Delve.
Yeah, that Serum Visions was basically a Lotus Petal for Delve. Andrew has an Ornithopter, and I believe that is a Masterpiece Steel Overseer to go along with his board, but he's going to be facing down a Tassiger, and if Kevin has a way to remove that Steel Overseer, this could be bad news for Andrew.
And if I were going to describe the average way that I would expect this matchup to play out, I would say Andrew's going to come out early with a lot of creatures. He's going to be ahead on the board, and then Kevin's going to be trying to catch up. But here we see the roles reversed. And this is one of the things that's you want to have in a lot of your mid-range decks, is some way to capitalize on your opponent stumbling and getting some pressure out. And this turn 2 Tassiger is doing just that.
Well, Kevin's going to fall to 15 with the Scalding Tarn, getting a Mountain. We're going to say Young Pyromancer and a Lightning Bolt taking care of that Steel Overseer, which is going to bring along with it a 1/1 red elemental token for Kevin. This is a great start for Grixis Delver.
Yeah, we've seen Andrew stumble a little bit on these opening turns. He's been doing some stuff, but not nearly as explosive as what we would expect from the average Affinity draw. He did mulligan to 6, but Kevin is just firing on all cylinders, making his deck look real good.
Arcbound Ravager is the play for Andrew, and just going to pass the turn back. Kevin is in the driver's seat here, and if he can find something like Kolaghan's Command or Electrolyze, he might just be able to put this game too far out of reach for Andrew.
Yeah, Andrew will have a little bit of play against removal spells because of that Arcbound Ravager, but he's still got to be pretty worried because he just doesn't have enough power and toughness on the board. Normally we would think of Arcbound Ravager as this powerhouse creature for 2 mana, but in this board state, it just doesn't have enough to synergize with, so its power is not particularly high.
Well, here we have a Delver of Secrets for Kevin, and just going to pass the turn back to Andrew. He has 3 mana available. No play from either player, and Andrew's just going to pass the turn back to Kevin. Delver of Secrets is going to flip. How lucky. The Serum Visions is going to be the draw for Kevin Jones, and the world is his oyster at this point.
Yeah, it looks like with the way Kevin's deck is set up, he has a little less than a 50% chance to flip his Delver, but that's still pretty good given Modern as a format being a little lower on the really powerful cantrips that we see in Legacy.
Well, Serum Visions is going to be the play for Kevin. He'll get an elemental token, draw a card, and then scry 2, both cards to the bottom. Let's see what he decides to attack with. Tasigur, and maybe the Delver of Secrets. Nope, just a Tasigur.
And Kevin can basically get aggressive with impunity. The one thing that he needs to worry about a little bit is the potential of a flying creature getting really big. And that's the reason that he's keeping this Delver back. He can chump block on the ground for days with Young Pyromancer and his tokens, but Kevin's got to worry a little bit about an Ornithopter getting something like a Cranial Plating, or Andrew Skorik trying to go all in on the Ornithopter and sacking all of his other artifacts to the Ravager and putting those counters on the Ornithopter.
Well, Andrew is going to take 4 from the Tasigur, the Golden Fang attack, and fall down to 12. He'll use a Galvanic Blast to kill the flipped Insectile Aberration on Kevin's end step. He's going to add a Signal Pest to his board and pass the turn. On Andrew's end step, Kevin's going to fall to 14 and sacrifice his Polluted Delta for a basic island. Maybe we'll see a Tasigur the Golden Fang activation. And that's what's going to happen. He's going to mill himself for 2, and then Andrew gets to pick a non-land card from his graveyard to put it into Kevin's hand.
Yeah, and this is pretty sweet. Kevin basically has this game locked up, so this Tasigur activation is basically just more fuel to the fire, but it's not something that's really going to decide the game. But I am happy to see that he is actually getting an opportunity to use it.
Well, Andrew is going to choose to put that Serum Visions into Kevin's hand from his graveyard, and then after that resolves, he's going to use a Galvanic Blast to take care of the Young Pyromancer. Kevin will cast that Serum Visions, draw a card, and then we're going to scry 2 and see how he wants to take this game. He's going to bottom both cards off of the scry. Looks to be potentially tapping some mana. Nope, we're just going to attack with our Tasigur. Andrew is at 8.
And this Tasigur is a 2-turn clock, which is something that Andrew needs to acknowledge, especially because he's dealing with a Lightning Bolt deck. So Andrew needs to worry not only about the 4 damage coming from Tasigur being a 2-turn clock, but if he takes 4 damage from the Tasigur dropping him down to 4, he's going to have to worry about just a single Lightning Bolt and a Snapcaster Mage finishing him off.
Well, Memnite is going to block the Tasigur, the Golden Fang, and then will be sacrificed to Arcbound Ravager. Kevin will pass the turn. On Andrew's turn, looks like he has a Masterpiece Edition Mox Opal and an Etched Champion. So this is going to give him a blocker for that Tasigur, the Golden Fang.
Yeah, Etched Champion is one of the cards in Affinity that has impressed me the most. Just having protection from everything, it's not only able to block large creatures like Wormcoil Engine, Tasigur, or Tarmogoyf, it also is an unblockable creature. So it's a great target for not only Arcbound Ravager, but Cranial Plating. And there is, a small potential for Andrew to actually claw his way back into this game.
All right, well, Kevin is going to Snapcaster Mage and cast a Lightning Bolt on Andrew's end step, and then just untap and attack with all of his creatures. But even before blockers, he'll show Lightning Bolt and Snapcaster Mage still in his hand. So Andrew is going to scoop it up. Kevin Jones is going to take the first game here in round 13 with his Grixis Delver deck over Affinity. Let's take a look at our players' sideboards so we can see just what kind of options they have. On Andrew's side, we have 2 Ravenous Trap, 2 Dismember, 2 Stubborn Denial, 2 Gear per Ether Grid, 2 Ancient Grudge, 1 Etched Champion, 1 Spellskite, 1 Chalice of the Void, 1 Grafdigger's Cage, and 1 Whip Flare. How do we think Andrew's going to sideboard?
So I think that he actually has a lot of good options for this matchup. I don't think he'll bring in all of them, though, because he is a very synergy-based deck. Dismember is a card that he could look to have some removal. Stubborn Denial is a good way to fight Kevin's removal. Etch Champion is going to be one of his better threats in the matchup. Spellskite is going to be yet another good way that he has to fight removal. And Chalice of the Void also is something that he should be considering, because Kevin not only has a lot of 1-mana removal, but also a lot of 1-mana cantrips. Whip Flare is also going to be one of Andrew's standout cards in the matchup, because it can kill all of Kevin's threats outside of Tasigur, the Golden Fang. That said, that's a lot of removal, a lot of interaction. Andrew wants to preserve his aggressive game plan and probably can't bring in all of these cards, but just wants to pick and choose the best ones.
Now on Kevin's side, we have 2 Surgical Extraction, 2 Magma Spray, 2 Dispel, 2 Painful Truths, 1 Izzet Staticaster, 1 Kolaghan's Command, 1 Spell Pierce, 1 Vandal Blast, 1 Engineered Explosives, 1 Counter Squall, and 1 Desolate Lighthouse. What do we think Kevin's going to do?
So Kevin has a lot of good options, and I think he's going to bring in all of them. The 2 Magma Sprays, the Izzet Staticaster, Kolaghan's Command, great in the matchup, Vandal Blast, Engineered Explosives, all of these are going to be quite powerful.
Yeah, those seem like great cards, especially Vandal Blast.
Oh yeah.
They'll kill all of your stuff for 5 mana, or you can do it for 1 mana if you just need to smelt something.
Yeah. Yeah, the flexibility on that card is unbelievable.
So this is, Affinity in particular is just a pretty classic deck. And I know that Grixis is a deck that kind of ebbs and flows in Modern, and Kevin is one of the big proponents of it. And you can also find information on decks like that happen to ebb and flow on the SCG newsletter.
Ooh, nice.
So it is your source for Magic the Gathering news. You can get the latest on the SCG Tour. You can watch the SCG Tour Match of the Week, receive exclusive deck lists and advice, catch up on all the event results, and even read an exclusive Cardboard Crack comic.
Yeah, it really is a great way to just kind of keep up to date on everything in a pretty time-efficient way. If you're only going to read one thing, this kind of shows up, gives you the highlights, and there's also a lot of guest writers. I've written for it, Chris has written for it, great people like Tom Ross, I believe, have written for it too. You just, you get a little bit of everything from it.
Absolutely. That's the SCG newsletter. It's your source for Magic the Gathering news. You can sign up for free. Go to starcitygames.com/newsletter. Make sure you jump on that today.
So in that last game, we sort of saw when Kevin was winning, it was like an avalanche or a tidal wave of resources. Kevin just had all of this stuff. He had more attackers than Andrew had blockers, and on top of that, Kevin had a bunch of burn spells and even more resources still in his grip. And I think a lot of times that's the way you're going to see Kevin win these games. So when Kevin is at the point where he's going to win the game, it's probably not going to be a tight race where each player has exhausted all of their resources. It's more likely going to be a situation where Kevin stabilized, built up a bunch of resources, and then once he started to get an excess of resources, then he started getting offensive. So it's really going to be on Andrew to try to make it so that the game just doesn't last that long. Andrew wants to try to make it so that not all of Kevin's resources matter by having something like an Etch Champion that can blank a lot of Kevin's removal. And Andrew just wants to play a bunch of stuff really fast and shove.
Well, let's learn a little bit more about Kevin Jones while our players finish up shuffling here. He is a member of TeamMetagamegurus.com, as denoted by that gorgeous, gorgeous bright yellow jersey.
Yep.
He's 28 years young from Kingston, New York. 9 open top 8s with 2 wins, 0 invitational top 8s and wins. He did play college tennis at Pace University as a walk-on after teaching himself the game. He won the Eternal Weekend Legacy Championship with Blue Red Delver last year. And he enjoys reading. He reads at least 1 mystery novel every week. That's a pretty big commitment to read 1 novel every week.
Yeah, it is, but I don't know. It's a nice thing to do, right before you go to sleep as a way to wind down. I actually do a fair bit of reading too.
Yeah, but a novel a week, that's a lot.
Novels, if you're reading for 45 minutes before you go to sleep every night, you can actually go through it pretty fast.
Fair enough. Well, Kevin Jones, 13th ranked player on our Player of the Year leaderboard, was able to play in both of the first 2 Players' Championships.
Yep. Yeah, and Kevin's a great player. I've known him for a long time. Me and him actually went to the same local card store in Nanuet where he won at a, shout out to everyone at Toy Wiz, where Kevin actually won his WMCQ. Which is pretty sweet, beating, and that was a stacked WMCQ.
Yeah,
you had like John Finkel,
he ended up being Sam Black in the finals.
just a bunch of real knockout stars at that event. But Kevin Jones beat them all because he's, just literal god. And he's super known for being a blue player. He's been a blue player for a long time. So if you like Delver decks, if you like playing, just these blue tempo-y decks, Kevin Jones is someone that you want to follow because he's always playing some variety of them.
I am a little surprised, to be completely honest, that a member of his team is playing Mantis Rider in this tournament and Kevin Jones is not also playing Mantis Rider. That has to be a story in and of itself. Maybe we can figure out why he decided to stick with Grixis instead of hopping on the Jim Davis train with Mantis Rider.
I think
that's his card. That's the Kevin Jones Invitational card. Is Mantis Rider.
I think the thing is the Mantis Rider deck that we saw Jim playing is definitely more of an aggressive burn deck, whereas the Grixis Delver deck that Kevin's playing is much more of a mid-range deck, and Kevin usually prefers to play decks that aren't hyper aggressive, that maybe can Snapcaster burn the opponent, but they're usually looking to Snapcaster control the opponent in basically mid-range card advantage attrition war.
And Kevin already does have a Modern Championship under his belt. He won the Dallas Open with Grixis Delver. I believe he beat one of his teammates, Peter Ingram, in the finals of that tournament. Here we go, Game 2, Andrew Skorik against Kevin Jones. Andrew's going to start off with a Vault Scourge falling down to 18. Kevin just has a polluted Delta. Vault Scourge is going to attack, even in the life totals, at 19 apiece. On Andrew's second turn, though, he has a Steel Overseer and a Memnite. And only having a few cards left in his hand. It looks like Kevin has Izzet Staticaster in his hand. So,
that's brutal.
So if he can get rid of that Steel Overseer, that Staticaster is going to just wreak havoc.
If for some reason Kevin can't get rid of the Steel Overseer, though, it is going to be a huge problem. I would assume that Kevin will have some sort of answer, though. His deck is almost mono removal. The Grixis Delver deck, it's a lot like Jund, where you may have 2 or 3 creatures in your deck that are just creatures, but other than that, it's all removal.
Kevin is going to fall down to 18 using Polluted Delta to find a swamp. Collective Brutality. Let's see how many modes.
Yeah, I'm curious to see if Kevin chooses to discard. And I would assume the other mode is to look at his hand and take an instant or sorcery. There's a good chance that that's going to miss, but there are some potent cards that Andrew could have that are instants or sorcery that Kevin would want to get rid of. And discarding that land from Kevin may just be a free roll. He may just feel he has more lands than he needs, and so he can just sort of throw one away.
Looks like Andrew also has a Mox Opal that was down there to the side that we missed initially. So this Cranial Plating is going to resolve and equip to the Vault Scourge. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's going to be 7 power on the Vault Scourge, 1 power on the Memnite. This is going to be a lot of damage. Yeah,
this is a pretty good attack for Andrew, but if Kevin is able to play a Izzet Staticaster next turn, things are going to swing in the other direction pretty quickly. And I think one of the reasons that Kevin was willing to throw away that Steam Vents to try to look at Andrew's hand was he wanted to make sure that the coast was clear for this Izzet Staticaster to potentially take over the game.
Looks like he also has a Vandal Blast in his hand, so we're going to go with the Serum Visions. That will draw a card, and then he's going to scry 2. So it doesn't look like we're going with the Staticaster just yet.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised by that, but we'll see what else he has for this turn instead.
I guess he will just 1-for-1 the Vandal Blast instead of waiting a few turns to try and get greedy.
And this kind of makes sense because he wants to deal with the Cranial Plating. It is the real source of damage, not necessarily the creatures. Although this certainly complicates things.
An Arcbound Ravager for Andrew is to make things nice and rough. An attack for 2 is going to bring Kevin down to 10 and put Andrew up to 25.
And this is looking pretty good for Andrew. It's going to be a little tricky for Kevin to answer everything that Andrew is doing.
No, Andrew just has another Mox Opal, so he's going to feed the first one to his Ravager and then play his other Mox Opal. A Lightning Bolt for Kevin is a pretty good pickup.
Yeah, Lightning Bolt plus Izzet Staticaster is definitely going to be Kevin's way to win this game.
Kevin will fall to 9, utilizing his Steam Vents. or his Scalding Tarn to find an island.
And there's a couple ways that this could play out, depending on if Kevin goes for an Izzet Staticaster and Lightning Bolt. We'll have to see exactly what happens and exactly how Andrew decides to manage his Arcbound Ravager, because he's going to have a lot of options. If Kevin tries to target the Ravager with something like Lightning Bolt, Andrew's going to have the opportunity to either sack a bunch of permanents to the Ravager, making it so that it's big enough to survive the Lightning Bolt, or he can just sacrifice the Ravager in response to put the counters on something else. I think because Andrew has 3 artifacts that he can potentially sack, there's a good chance he just sacrifices the Opal and another artifact. Oh, and he actually sacrifices the Inkmoth Nexus, which is a pretty sweet play. This way he gets to preserve more of his attacking power. And now if Kevin wants to try to finish off this Ravager, Andrew can still drop the counters on one of his other creatures.
What's interesting here is that Kevin actually has a Snapcaster Mage in his hand. So if he would have fetched there for a red source, then he could have snapped the Vandal Blast on the Ravager and then Lightning Bolted the target of the modular from the Ravager, which would have allowed him to take care of the Ravager and all of the counters on it. But as it stands now, Andrew is just going to attack with the 4/4 and 2 1/1s.
And this is getting a little dicey for Kevin. He's starting to get into a situation where he's going to have to worry about a Galvanic Blast finishing off. He has the cards to answer all of Andrew's stuff, but it's going to be a matter of whether or not he has time.
So it looks like Kevin is going to flash in his Staticaster and try and deal a point of damage to that Vault Scourge. With the Staticaster now, he can still use the Snap Vandal Blast next turn to destroy an artifact and then ping whatever the target of the modular is.
And I think if I were Andrew, I would just sacrifice the creature to make the Ravager bigger. Because if you just have a creature, well, it looks like he's going to go all in on this Vault Scourge.
So Vault Scourge is going to deal 6 and bring Kevin down to 3. That's going to knock Andrew up to 31.
And from Andrew's perspective, what's nice about this is now he has a flyer that dodges Lightning Bolt and is a 2-turn clock. But Kevin certainly has a lot of potential answers to it. He has Kolagon's Command, Snapcaster Vandal Blast, he has Terminate. There's a good chance that Kevin's going to be able to find an answer. Oh, and actually, excuse me, they updated the life total. It's actually a 1-turn clock.
All right, so now we get the Snap Vandal Blast. Kevin's still going to have that Staticaster back on defense, and it's going to kill a large number of creatures in Andrew's deck.
Yeah, Andrew, because he's at 31, has a lot of time, but he actually doesn't have a whole lot that can win the game for him from here.
Well, Andrew has a Ravager. Kevin's going to deal a point of damage to it, causing Andrew to sacrifice his Darksteel Citadel, but he does have a Lightning Bolt, which is going to kill the Ravager and kill the Glimmer Void on Kevin's end step.
Yeah.
So Andrew is actually going to have 0 permanents.
Yeah, and this is one of the weird things that can happen with Affinity. And there's a small chance that Andrew can still steal this game with something like a Galvanic Blast, but because of the mana leak that we see in Kevin's hand and this Izzet Staticaster, the game is probably locked up. And this is a little more typical of how the matchup plays out. We see that Andrew had a nice fast start, was able to get in a lot of damage, but Kevin Jones's deck has a lot of cheap removal, is able to stabilize at just enough life, and now Kevin is going to be able to start closing out this game.
This Delver of Secrets is not flipped yet, but we're still getting 3 damage per turn. Delver is now going to flip, revealing a Magma Spray, which Kevin will draw. Now we're attacking for 5. That'll knock Andrew down to 18.
Yeah, now we're going to wrap things up a little closer. And I'm curious to see if Kevin actually cracks these fetch lands. He doesn't really need the mana, and Galvanic Blast might be something that's on his radar. He has the mana leak to potentially deal with it, but if he can play around running Galvanic Blasts, you might as well.
So he will. The attack is going to bring Andrew down to 13. Here we have a cranial plating now that he's found a second land. Kevin's deciding if he wants to counter it or not. Looks like he's not going to.
I like the idea of, at this stage, ignoring the equipment and just dealing with the creatures.
All right, the attack for 5 is going to knock Andrew down to 8. Here we have a Tassiger.
And this means that Kevin has Andrew dead on Kevin's next turn. So we've got a 1-turn clock. Andrew has to top deck something right now. Don't really know what he could even top deck.
Well, looks like he's not going to find anything, and Kevin Jones is going to take this match 2-0 on Grixis Delver over Andrew Skorik on Affinity. Kevin's going to move to 11-2. Andrew's going to drop down to 10-3. Both players still extremely live to top 8 this event.
Yeah, some pretty exciting stuff. I like seeing this Grixis Delver deck. It has a lot of the elements of Jund that I really like, but Snapcaster Mage is just such a boon in these mid-range mirrors. It's so powerful, giving you simply more of whatever you need, as well as